All right, buckle up, because today we're launching a deep dive straight into the heart of the Himalayas to uncover the truth about the legendary Gurkhas.
And trust me, there's a whole lot more to discover than just those curved knives and tails of fearless charges.
Yeah, this deep dive was actually a request from one of our listeners who specifically wanted to go beyond the stereotypes, so that's exactly where we're headed.
Right on.
I have a feeling this is going to be one of those deep dives where we end up with even more questions than we started with, but isn't that always the best kind of learning?
Absolutely.
We're going to be diving into excerpts from their Wikipedia page today, which seems like a pretty good place to start separating fact from fiction. Now, I think most people have at least heard the name Gurkha, but beyond that, things tend to get, well, a little hazy. So where do we even begin?
Well, maybe a good place to start would be to sort of unpack the term Gurkha itself, because it's a bit more nuanced than you might think.
Okay, so it's not just a generic term for like any soldier from that part of the world.
Exactly, exactly. It's actually an anglicized version of Gorkhali, which
Mhm.
essentially means someone from the Gorkha region of Nepal. So it's about a specific place and a rich, complex history.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about a specific region, not just like a general term?
Just like, think about it, we're talking about the rise of the Gorkha kingdom,
Oh.
back in the 1700s. It was a dynasty really known for, some might even say infamous for, their military skills.
Hmm.
And what's fascinating is their connection to Guru Goraknath, a revered Hindu warrior saint. So imagine the British encounter these incredibly skilled soldiers, deeply rooted in their traditions, and then they adopt the name Gurkha. It's almost like this fascinating moment of cultural exchange happening right in the middle of, well, conflict.
Yeah, I mean, that already is a much more like vivid picture than just the word Gurkha ever could be. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
All of a sudden you have this image of like soldiers steeped in this really long history, this tradition going toe to toe with, well, the most powerful empire of the time.
Absolutely. And it gets even more interesting because it's important to remember that there are both Nepali and Indian Gurkhas serving in armies around the world.
Yeah.
So that distinction, the fact that they're present in both nations' forces, is going to be super important as we kind of delve deeper into their story.
Okay, so we've got this term, it's rooted in this really specific region and history, but now it's branching out. So how did they go from a regional force to this globally renowned military group? I know the Wikipedia page mentions the Anglo-Nepalese War as kind of a turning point. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, yeah. The Anglo-Nepalese War was fought between, well, the Gorkha Kingdom and the British East India Company from 1814 to 1816. And it really flipped the script. It all started over border disputes and, let's be real, a bit of imperial ambition on both sides.
Right, right.
But here's the thing. While the British ultimately won that war, they were totally blown away by the Gurkhas.
Oh, wow. So even in defeat, they still made a huge impact.
Absolutely. The British were deeply impressed by their military skills, their tenacity, their sheer courage, even when they were facing defeat, really made the British rethink things. Imagine being on that battlefield, witnessing that firsthand. It really challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare.
Yeah, so it wasn't just about like winning or losing that war. It was about recognizing something exceptional in the way these soldiers, approached warfare.
You got it. It was about respect. The British realized that having Gurkha soldiers on their side, well, that was a massive strategic advantage. There's actually this great quote, it's by Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, that I think perfectly captures the sentiment. He said, "If a man says he is not afraid of dying, he is either lying or he is a Gurkha."
Wow. That's quite the endorsement. So this newfound respect for the Gurkhas, it had to lead to some pretty significant changes in how they were perceived, right?
Oh, absolutely. This newfound respect directly led to the formation of the Nasiri Regiment in 1815, which would later become the first King George's own Gurkha Rifles. This was a monumental moment, the beginning of the Gurkhas officially being a part of the British military.
So from rivals on the battlefield to comrades in arms, what a turn of events. It sounds like, I don't know, kind of a win-win, right? The British get these incredibly capable soldiers. The Gurkhas are now part of, well, a global power. But I'm guessing it wasn't always that simple, was it?
You're right, it definitely wasn't always straightforward. And, the article even points out that early recruitment wasn't limited to just those from the Gorkha region. We're talking Kumaonis, Garhwalis groups from the wider Himalayan region were all eventually grouped under the Gurkha umbrella.
Interesting. So the definition of Gurkha was already kind of evolving, becoming more inclusive, even back then. But now they're part of the British forces. So what happens next? What were some of those key events that really shaped their reputation in the decades that followed?
Well, to be honest, their integration into the British forces wasn't exactly, seamless. Initially, they served under the British East India Company, being deployed in a series of conflicts. The Pindri War of 1817, the Siege of Papur in 1826, the First and Second Anglo-Sikh Wars.
Sounds like they were thrown right into the thick of it, huh? Facing all sorts of challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And it was during this time that their reputation really began to take shape. But I'd say the event that really cemented their image in military history was their role in the Indian Rebellion of 1857.
Right, that was a huge turning point in Indian history. What was it like for the Gurkhas, being caught in the middle of that uprising?
Yeah, this is where things get really complex. See, the Gurkhas, by then deeply embedded within the company's forces, they made a choice. They sided with the British. Just imagine the weight of that decision, fighting against a rebellion in the very land where many of them came from.
Wow. Yeah. That's quite the dilemma. I mean, talk about being caught between, loyalty and your birthplace. It really speaks volumes about their complex relationship with both the British and the shifting, political scene on the Indian subcontinent.
It really does. And it was during the rebellion, especially in that brutal siege of Delhi, that their loyalty was really tested. The Wikipedia article mentions the 8th Sirmoor local battalion fighting right alongside the British 60th Rifles. They earned respect even from their adversaries, forging a bond in the crucible of this conflict.
That seems to be something that we keep coming back to. Even amidst the, chaos and brutality of war, the Gurkhas earn respect and sort of built these bridges, even as they're, engaging in these incredibly difficult situations. But we're getting close to the end of the 19th century, and with that comes the dawn of the 20th century and this whole new set of global conflicts. So how does this change things for the Gurkhas? How does their story evolve as we enter the era of world wars?
Well, that's where we're headed next. World War I, it really puts their skills and adaptability to the test on a global scale, unlike anything they'd ever seen. And trust me, their role in it, it's a story you won't want to miss.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're picking right back up with our exploration of the Gurkhas, and we're right on the edge of some serious global conflict. Last time we were talking about how their loyalty was put to the test during the Indian Rebellion of 1857, a choice with, well, massive consequences. But now we're moving into the 20th century, and the world is, well, about to change forever with World War I. How did this global conflict reshape the Gurkha story?
World War I really brought the Gurkhas' adaptability to the forefront and cemented their reputation on a whole other level. I mean, we're talking about a shift from these regional conflicts to being deployed all across the globe, facing situations unlike anything they'd seen before.
The Wikipedia article mentioned something about their numbers actually increasing during this period. How much of a jump are we talking?
It's pretty amazing, actually. So at the beginning of the 20th century, you had something like 20 Gurkha battalions. By the time World War I is in full swing, that number had skyrocketed to 33. But it wasn't just about the sheer numbers, it was where and how they were used. They weren't limited to just one battlefront anymore. We're talking the trenches of Europe, the Middle Eastern deserts, they were everywhere.
Hold on, wait. The Middle East, I always picture the Gurkhas in the mountains, navigating the Himalayas. Desert warfare seems like a completely different thing.
Right, it's a common misconception. While sure, their training and background definitely lent themselves to fighting in mountainous terrain, World War I really proved they could handle anything. Take the Gallipoli campaign, for example. Brutal conditions, intense battles. And yet they excelled. The story of the first 6th Gurkhas capturing Gurkha Bluff that says it all.
Wow, Gurkha Bluff. Talk about really making your mark. It really does sound like they weren't just known for how well they fought, but for their ability to overcome just about anything.
Exactly. And then you have the Battle of Loos, where they face the full force of the German army. The Wikipedia article even mentions this, well, how do you say, haunting quote about the Gurkhas finding their Valhalla at Loos.
Oh, wow. That's pretty intense. What was it their commanding officer, Lieutenant General Sir James Wilcox, said about their courage?
He talked about how they just kept throwing themselves against the German defenses again and again with this unwavering courage. It's tragic, of course, but it shows you how their reputation, that almost legendary status, was solidified in those incredibly difficult battles.
It is interesting how, amidst the tragedy of war, these stories of bravery emerge. But it wasn't just the European front for them, right?
Oh, not at all. We're talking deployments in Mesopotamia, Persia, even fighting alongside Lawrence of Arabia during the Arab Revolt. They were all over the place during World War I. That really shattered the idea of them as just mountain warriors. Their ability to adapt became just as legendary as their fighting.
So by the end of World War I imagine the world had a very different view of the Gurkhas. No longer just a regional force, but an essential part of the British military.
You could definitely say that World War I really globalized the Gurkha legacy, so to speak. But, and this is important, this period also planted the seeds for, well, some future complications, you could say, in their relationship with the British Army. After the war, a lot of the Gurkha regiments were given frontier duties in India.
Frontier duties, what did that entail exactly?
Well, essentially, it involved guarding those vast borders of British India, often in pretty remote and challenging locations. Picture being stationed in the northwest frontier, dealing with harsh conditions, constant threats, not exactly the most glamorous posting after, being on the world stage.
So even though they served with such distinction, there was still this feeling of not being fully utilized or appreciated.
That's a really good point. And that tension, that sense of inequality within the British Army structure would only grow stronger as we head toward World War II.
And speaking of World War II, I know the Wikipedia article mentioned an even greater level of involvement for them in that global conflict. So what can you tell us about their role in that fight?
If World War I was about proving how adaptable they were, World War II showed just how important the Gurkhas were to the Allied forces. Their numbers exploded again from 20 battalions at the start to a mind-blowing 43 during the peak of the war. Training centers popped up all across India just to keep up with the demand.
43 battalions, that's massive. It really does sound like the world needed the Gurkhas once again. Where were they deployed this time?
Everywhere, really. From the jungles of Burma to the mountains of Italy, wherever the fighting was at its worst, the Gurkhas were there. But here's something that's often overlooked. Their role within the army had changed, become much more diverse.
What do you mean? I always think of them as being known for their skills as infantrymen, right?
Oh, they were incredible at that. But World War II saw them taking on all sorts of specialized roles. Paratroopers, engineers, signals, even military police. Their skills were being recognized and used in new ways.
Wait, hold on, Gurkha paratroopers. That's both amazing and, well, kind of terrifying, right?
Let's just say their reputation went before them, and for good reason. But, this really highlights a crucial point. The Gurkhas were never just a one-dimensional fighting force. They were individuals, all with different skills and experiences, brought together by their shared heritage and that incredible dedication to service.
Such a good point. But even with these new roles, I imagine there were still limitations placed on them, especially in terms of leadership roles within the British Army, right?
You're right, and that's a huge issue, one that had long-lasting consequences. Even though they'd more than proven themselves, the British Army back then was still bound by its hierarchies, and those weren't always fair.
That's definitely a story for our next segment. We're going to dive into the issues of rank, the post-World War II world, and the legacy of the Gurkhas in a time of massive global change. Stick around. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're diving into, well, what might be the most complicated part of the Gurkha story in this final segment. We've talked about their incredible service through 2 world wars, their adaptability, their bravery. But like we touched on in the last segment, there was always this tension, this question of how they were really treated within the very army they served.
It's a really crucial part of their story, for sure, especially as we get into the post-World War II era. You see, the British Empire itself was changing dramatically at that time. India's independence was on the horizon, and that brought a whole new set of realities for the Gurkhas.
Right, because their world was so connected to both Britain and India at that point. But before we get into those huge changes, the Wikipedia article mentions something called a Viceroy's Commission for Gurkha officers. What exactly was that, and how did it impact their careers in the British Army?
That's a really important question. And to be honest, it exposes some of the systemic inequality that existed within the British Indian Army back then. So Gurkha officers, no matter how skilled or experienced they were, could only achieve what was called a Viceroy's Commission. What that meant was they were always outranked by their British counterparts, even if they had the same level of experience.
Wow.
Imagine working your way up the ranks, proving yourself again and again in battle, only to hit this invisible ceiling purely based on where you were born.
That's unbelievable. It seems so unfair considering their loyalty and everything they sacrificed for the crown.
It was a huge point of contention. While there were extremely rare cases where a Gurkha officer could get a King's or Queen's commission, which would put them on equal footing with British officers, Those were like exceptions to the rule, especially before World War II. For the most part, there was a glass ceiling.
It really makes you think about the complexities of recognition and reward, even when we're talking about incredible acts of bravery. So, with the world changing so much, what happened to the Gurkha regiments when India finally gained its independence in 1947?
Well, the Wikipedia page details something called the Tripartite Agreement, which was
Huh.
basically a pact signed by India, Britain, and Nepal. This agreement ultimately decided the fate of these regiments. 6 Gurkha regiments became part of the new Indian Army, while 4 ended up continuing to serve with the British Army.
So, a divided legacy. It must have been a strange time for them, caught between the end of an empire, the birth of a new nation, and figuring out where their loyalties lay.
It was incredibly complex, and to make matters even more complicated, that division, that splitting of the regiments, it was followed by decades of controversy over pensions. Gurkhas, who had served with the British Army but retired before 1997, ended up getting significantly lower pensions compared to their British counterparts.
So, even after independence, that inequality remained.
It did, and it sparked this huge fight for equal treatment, a fight that continues to this day. Thankfully, there has been some real progress, thanks in no small part to individuals like Joanna Lumley.
Oh, right, the actress. I remember hearing about her work campaigning for Gurkha rights.
She was amazing, totally dedicated to this cause. It was also a personal issue for her because her own father was a Gurkha officer. Anyway, her efforts, along with a ton of public support, finally pushed the British government to grant those Gurkha veterans who had retired before 1997 the right to settle in the UK and receive equal pensions.
That's incredible. A hard-fought victory, but so well-deserved. It just goes to show you the power of, raising awareness and fighting for what's right, even decades later. But what about the Gurkha regiments that joined the Indian Army? How did their story unfold?
They've become a vital part of the Indian Armed Forces, participating in every major conflict that India's been involved in since 1947. And they're still serving in peacekeeping missions around the world today. The Indian Army Gurkhas have definitely built their own legacy, earning respect for their bravery, their professionalism, their dedication.
It's a good reminder that the Gurkha story isn't just about their history with the British Army. Their story is now part of the military traditions of multiple nations, reflecting just how global their impact has been.
Exactly, and it doesn't end there. I mean, the Wikipedia page even mentions things like the Singapore Gurkha Contingent and the Brunei Gurkha Reserve Unit. That just goes to show you how much their skills are still valued today.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it. From World War II battlefields to the streets of Singapore, there's this enduring legacy, this demand for everything they represent. What is it about the Gurkhas that makes them such enduring figures in military history, do you think?
It's more than just their fighting skills, though those are obviously impressive. It's their discipline, their loyalty, their sense of duty, and their sheer courage in the face of, well, anything. Those are qualities that go beyond any one conflict or any specific time period.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from figuring out what Gurkha even means, to understanding their evolving role in all these global conflicts, to their fight for recognition and their place in history.
Yeah.
If you had to pick one key takeaway for our listeners today, what would it be?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the Gurkhas aren't just legends or romanticized warriors. They're real people with families, with personal histories, with complex identities. For centuries, they've had to navigate shifting political powers, serve with incredible bravery, and fight for their place in the world. Their story is one of resilience, the complexities of identity, and the power of courage and sacrifice.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up our deep dive today, I wanted to leave our listeners with this one last thought from the Wikipedia page. Did you know that a staggering 26 Victoria Crosses, the highest British award for valor, have been given to soldiers from Gurkha regiments?
That's more than any other military unit. It's an incredible testament to their bravery, their willingness to put themselves in harm's way, often for a nation that didn't always give them the equality or respect they deserved.
Which makes their story even more important for us to tell, to understand, to remember. So, for everyone listening, I hope this deep dive has inspired you to learn more. Don't stop here. Go check out the work of the Gurkha Welfare Trust. Seek out the individual stories of these incredible soldiers. Explore how they've shaped cultures far beyond the Himalayas. There's a whole world of incredible stories out there waiting to be discovered.